From CGTN headquarters in Beijing, this is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hello and welcome to The Hub on CGTN. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. We're following all the latest developments on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The two sides are talking, but not much progress have been reported. Are these talks just window-dressing global appeals for a ceasefire? Or could these talks actually lead to a peace deal of sorts? Meanwhile, nearly 500,000 Ukrainians have left the place they call home. In a country of 44 million, that means every 1 in 8 Ukrainians have now become a refugee. This is truly heart-wrenching. To understand more about what is going on and what will happen, we're now joined in Kyiv, also known as Kyiv, by Iliya Kusa. He is a political analyst at the Ukrainian Institute for the Future, and in Moscow, Russia, by Mark Sleboda, international relations and security analyst. And also in Beijing, we have Professor Wang Yiwei, Monnet Chair professor and director of the Center for EU Studies at Renmin University. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Let me start with you, Mark. What do you think are the sticking points of the first round of the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine?
Okay, well, the sticking points is that neither side is at all interested in any substantial ceasefire at this point. Both sides have made maximalist demands, indicating that. They have positively indicated that they are willing to continue to talk into the future. But right now, with the Kyiv regime's maximalist demands that Russia withdraw from Crimea from its own territory and from the Donetsk and Lugansk republics, which it has recognized as independent states due to the U.S.-backed Kyiv regime's 8-year bloody war against them. And with Russia's demands essentially for the total military surrender of the U.S.-backed regime in Kyiv, that is demilitarization. They have also demanded the denazification, meaning that the far-right battalions in Ukraine that glorify World War II era Nazi collaborators, Azov, the right sector, and their integration throughout the Ukrainian police, military, security services, mainstream political parties must be purged.
Well, it's not hard to imagine this could all be about, a giving and taking. Iliya, what do you think?
Well, I think that there are two main points of negotiations right now. The first one is ceasefire. So the sides are trying to decide when and how to announce, to conclude a ceasefire agreement right now. This is the first step that they want to take. And the second one is withdrawing Russian forces from Ukrainian territories. But of course, there is this question of conditions under which this may occur, and of course, where they should do that. Because again, there was information that Ukrainian side reportedly said that they demanded the withdrawal of Russian forces from all Ukrainian territory, including our eastern regions and Crimea, but this was denied by the presidential office of Ukraine. So now I think they are talking mostly about how a ceasefire and withdrawing of Russian forces from the territories they invaded since 24th of February.
Professor Wang, this is a grand bargaining where the two sides are laying out what they want. This is still very early on in the initial stages of talks. What do you think can happen next? When can we expect a breakthrough of sorts?
Georgia joy is better than war. I think, but the joy is a long time. There are three kinds of contradictions between each side about this war: stop and ceasefire, and about Crimea is about 2014. But in the long term, what the membership of the Ukraine as EU or NATO, whatever. So that takes a long negotiation process.
What do you think happened during the first round of talks? Because according to reports, they lasted some 4 or 5 hours in Belarus.
The problem is, I think, from the Ukraine side, the thing about it, they have a strong support, because even Germany sent so many, equipment facilities to Ukraine. This changed Germany's the Second World War's position. So this makes then the Ukraine government think that they have the bargain, tips to more have a negotiation with Russia.
And then what do you think about the fact that some are calling this a proxy war? If you look at the fact that many NATO countries, EU members, and the United States, of course, are supporting Russia by sending them ammunitions and weapons.
It's a tragedy. Actually, about NATO expansion is also German forces is the military-industrial complex of the United States. So not just sells more weapons, even the harmonization of their commando system. So the most beneficial is American companies. So that's to make the situations more difficult to be said.
All right, Mark, I want to go back to you. Let's face it, the people who are suffering the most are the ordinary citizens. Let's talk about refugees. According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, about 500,000 people are leaving Ukraine, the very place they call home. About half of them crossed Ukraine's western borders into Poland. Others have gone to Hungary, Moldova, Romania, and Slovakia. For people who are living in peace or relative peace, it is hard to fully empathize with the situation. I mean, to empathize with the ordeal these refugees are going through, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually the refugee problem is much greater than that, because also recently some 200,000 refugees have been evacuated out of the Donetsk and Lugansk republics into Russia due to US-backed Kyiv regime shelling of the territory. And this conflict actually goes back 8 years because after they seized power in 2014, the regime in Kyiv began a military campaign to subjugate the east of its own country to its seizure of power in Kyiv. And some 2 million Eastern Ukrainian refugees have fled and sought safety in Russia, the most during the period of 2014 to 2015. But that displacement still continues.
Well, Iliya, you're in Kyiv, Ukraine. Talk to us about the situation there. Have you talked to your friends, family, relatives, or their friends about whether or not they're leaving or they're planning to leave? What is the situation there like?
Well, the situation is more or less stable today. Well, at least, yes, today at least, because at night it's a bit tense when there are rocket fire and artillery. And well, some people are still, well, the majority of people, I think, are still in Kyiv, at least if judging by, again, my circle, I mean, my friends and the people I know, they are still in Kyiv. Some of them have already fled to other regions or to the towns near Kyiv. And some people, they stay either at home or in underground bomb shelters throughout Kyiv. So the situation is, well, now it's under control, but of course there are many concerns about the humanitarian situation in Kyiv. Should it worse?
Iliya, can you give us a ballpark, an estimate about the percentage of Kyiv residents who are staying put? Iliya, I mean, you're talking about most of the people in the capital city are still staying where they are staying put. Can you give us a rough estimate about the percentage of the residents there who are staying put?
Well, we don't have the exact numbers, but it was stated by local authorities that of almost 3 million people living in Kyiv, by official estimates, I think only about like 15–20% left. So all others, they're still residing in the capital.
I mean, what are the feelings of the locals there, of the people that you've talked to, and of yourself, of course? Is it anxiety, uncertainty, panic, fear? What was it like?
Well, there is no panic, like, mass panic or something. No, of course, some people, they are feared and afraid of, what should come tomorrow. They're not, they don't know what to do. Many of them, many people are afraid because they have, for example, relatives in Kyiv, especially elderly people who they're trying to help or they can't reach, for example, if they live in different neighborhoods, because now it's pretty difficult to move around Kyiv. And of course, there is an uncertainty because people really don't know what to expect. You know, for example, at night when it's really constantly when some neighborhoods of the capital, mainly far from center, but are being shelled by Russian forces. So people, of course, are trying to figure out what to do. Many people are living in really, in not very good conditions in bomb shelters. And we had several, I think in Kyiv, we had several incidents where children were born in metro station underground or in shelters like, in like these, under these conditions. So I would say that there is a mix of emotions and reactions there, but I can say that there is no mass panic or something like that right now.
Yeah, Iliya, thanks for that update. I'm truly sorry about what people over there are going through. Professor Wang, let's talk about the refugees. Do you think the countries such as Romania, Moldova, even Belarus, Poland have the capacity in place to receive the mass influx of refugees from Western Ukraine?
They have to, because all the wars, not just in Europe, even in the Middle East, actually in recent years, the Europeans suffer the most to so-called receive. They have to receive the refugees. But this time, I think it's different with from Syria, and because they are Europeans, the language, the religions are very similar. European Union, they are decided to accept because it's also need to support Ukraine.
And the European Union is considering a proposal to granting the refugees from Ukraine a 3-year work permit. Do you think that could help?
Yes, because the president for Ukraine also have the urgent applying to join the European Union. As the political gesture, the European Union definitely will ready to accept more refugees from Ukraine.
Actually, as we speak, the European Union is deliberating. The Parliament of the European Union is deliberating the Ukrainian request to apply for the membership into the EU.
Yes, this hot potato actually. If allowed Ukraine join European Union, and what's the response of Turkey, which applied for decades, but in all kinds of reasons denied. But Ukraine, in many eyes, is not a good governance situation to join the quarantine. But it's politically urgent, maybe.
And then what do you think the United Nations Security Council can do to really help with the current ongoing humanitarian crisis?
Definitely, United Nations should play a very important, urgent role for ceasefire, for negotiation, also for refugees, for Red Cross, for all kinds of, that's the responsibility of the United Nations.
Alrighty, for the ongoing conflict, Mark, I want to get your insight as well. Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, decided to put Russian nuclear forces on high alert. Is this largely a deterrence strategy, or do you think there can be specific goals Vladimir Putin wants to achieve by doing that?
Yeah, this is largely a response to, according to the Kremlin, to heated rhetoric that has been coming out of Western capitals. Particularly, he noted the rhetoric of the British foreign minister. There has been talk of, Western countries seem to love the idea of regime change, and the mention of Russia and regime change has come up. And there is the question that European countries are fueling the conflict. I mean, they have long been fueling this 8-year conflict of the regime that seized power in 2014 against its own people in East Ukraine. But the flood of weapons that they have announced in recent days will certainly fuel the conflict and bring large number of civilians into it, because the regime in Kyiv is handing out weapons to untrained, unarmed civilians, which would mean, of course, sacrificing the sanctity of the neutrality of the civilian status for large numbers of people. They're effectively throwing human cannon fodder in front of the regime in an attempt to preserve itself. The Russian response to that is to try to alert NATO forces, particularly at the threats of bringing fighter jets into Ukraine, that they face a military response and Russia is ready to defend its military forces.
Well, Iliya, we saw information and also misinformation, of course, about the safety of Kyiv, also known as Kyiv, how close the Russian troops are towards Kyiv. Some say they're 40 miles away. Some say they are in Kyiv right now battling the Ukrainian soldiers. What is the situation when it comes to military engagement like on the streets of Kyiv?
Well, there are no mass military activities in the streets, so there were several attempts by Russian special forces to penetrate the capital from different directions by small groups, but they didn't achieve that. Right now, Russian army's positions are roughly, as far as I know, roughly 20 kilometers from Kyiv to the northwest. So they are mainly focusing their attention there right now. And also there is the second Russian military column, which is coming to Kyiv from, I think, yesterday, from northeast also. So there are two directions from which they are trying to concentrate forces. And I think in the coming days they will try to break Kyiv's defenses by their tanks, not only by these small groups that they used to do, by tanks from two different directions mainly, and what they're trying to do is to circle the capital and block it from all directions so as to pressure the Ukrainian government further.
Mark, if I can come back to you, people are talking about the fact that Russia's military offensive in Ukraine is considered a violation of UN Charter. But what about Washington's and NATO's provision of weapons to Ukrainian military? For example, Washington is sending Stinger missiles to Ukraine and the NATO is giving weapons and ammunition nonstop. Do you think this somehow violates international laws as well?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no question that all sides of this conflict, whether we're talking the regime that seized power in Kyiv with U.S. backing in 2014, that of course right there was a violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and independence right there. The Russian interventions in the Crimea, the Donbass, and now can certainly be seen as against international law. The Western fueling of the conflict, we're well past that. All sides are in violations of international law going all the way back to 2014, and we're largely in uncharted territory. But I mean, to be fair, with the number of invasions, occupations, and regime changes that the U.S. and its allies have done across the Middle East, whether we're talking Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, even earlier in Serbia, it's quite obvious that international law does not mean much to any great power that has the ability to project its military to match its foreign policy goals. And that has unfortunately long been the norm when the precedent is set by, the supposed superpower and leader of the free world. Of course, other countries are going to follow suit.
Professor Wang, what do you think about the West's insistence on providing ammunition and weapons to Ukraine?
Well, yes, United Nations secretly, the UN Charter, the precondition is that you have the independent sovereignty. So your security, your future is in your people's hand. But unfortunately, as our Russians guests mentioned about current Ukraine government, maybe not solely fully independent. They are more supported by the U.S., even proxy war, whatever. Even they have a dual citizenship for the president of the Ukraine himself. So this is not just the war between Ukraine and Russia. It's the continuity of the Russians' military confrontation and diplomatic confrontation with NATO. So the driving forces of the NATO expansion make the Russians strong response for that.
Regarding sales of weapons, China has this long-held, long-established principle of non-interference. Many consider China's position as propaganda. But let's face it, China make it clear that it doesn't export ammunition to countries at war, right? Either side. What do you think about this, and how do you compare this towards Washington's position, for example?
Well, according to Chinese traditional culture, we cannot add the oil to the fire. You should cease the fire, right? If you support, sell some more weapons to Ukraine, definitely make this war will continue, and then there are more casualties, more civilians, more refugees. The Europeans, the whole European countries pay the cost. This is not the. Secondly, this is a tragedy. Actually, they are brothers of the Ukraine, the Russians. They need to find their own solution, not just be used by external forces after a target. And then I think, finally, the European security should be on the hands of the European people, not just external, to make their decision. So finally, I think we should come back to the 1975, the Helsinki spirit, the integrated security, common security, sustainable security. I think the Committee of Shared Future, that's the final solution.
Iliya, what do you think?
I mean, well, first of all, I think that, of course, it's. I don't think it's really right, to compare the magnitude of violations under UN Charter, by Russia in 2014 and with weapons sales. The weapons sales which occurred during the last 7 or 8 years between Ukraine and other countries wasn't a violation of all, because it was an agreement. It was under the agreement between two different governments. Now, the problem here is that actually after 2014, Ukraine didn't attack anyone. So Russia attacked us, by capturing Crimea and parts of Ukraine's eastern regions, and this was a clear violation, which till today wasn't resolved in a due manner. So now the situation is spiraling out of control, because we're not talking we're not talking in terms of 2014-15. What happened then, when you had pro-Russian militants in the east, which were supported by Russia, and all this rhetoric. Now it's a full-scale conflict between two states. So Russia invaded Ukraine. It's not like and on no grounds. So it's without any argument, without any arguments. Only they actually in his speech on 21st February. A Russian president, unfortunately, de facto said that Ukraine is an artificial state. So he denied as states their sovereign rights. So now is the question on whether the world will live with this, in this kind of reality, and this will of course cause, I think, a lot of problems in international relations in the future, if no one reacts to that. Or maybe we should talk about how the new world order, the international relations system, should work so as to prevent such conflicts, because this is really dangerous.
Yeah. Talking about the international order and the international system, some latest news just in: the U.S. is expelling 12 Russian UN diplomats suspected of quote-unquote espionage activities. Mark, let's talk about this. People understand the frustration of Washington, right? But these Russian representatives in New York City at the UN headquarters, they're technically UN officials. I mean, is this move by Washington tantamount to expelling UN officials and therefore undermining or even delegitimizing the UN system?
Yeah, so when it comes to diplomatic tits for tats where there are expulsions, it is, not at all a secret that many countries, if not most countries, often have dual-use diplomat intelligence officers, and regular expulsions of that from a country, whether it's from the United States to Russia, Russia to the United States, European countries, that is kind of a norm. But for the United States to be expelling Russia's diplomatic representatives to the UN, this is really uncharted territory. This is the United States making a broadside against the entire principles of the United Nations. Not that this is the first time they have done this. They have also done this with other countries, with Iran and some of the other countries in the South that have come against its ire. But it really calls into question the legitimacy of the United Nations in the United States if they, are not willing to allow the countries of the world to be fairly represented by diplomats of their choice at the United Nations. I really don't see how the United States can continue to be allowed to hold the United Nations under such conditions.
Well, Professor Wang, this is an unprecedented move, right? Asking those 12 Russian UN diplomats to leave by March the 7th.
Timing, you see, current situation there send a very signal that the U.S. is back Ukraine, and then Ukraine will cannot reach the deal with Russia in a short time. So it's a tragedy.
And then what do you think really will happen to the UN system? Because supposedly the Russian permanent representative will not be, sitting on the chair of the UN Security Council.
So the U.S. they move to not the Security Council, they move to the General Assembly for the modify the public opinion to press Russia.
But they're the rotating chair of the Security Council.
Now they will change to another rotating presidency.
Do we know who will be the next?
Well, according to the UN, the regulation, they have their law. But the problem is about who will be the president of the Security Council presidency. But the problem is who can modify more people, more countries to support, take the side, which side, Ukraine side or Russian side.
Okay, Mark, one more question, just out of curiosity. Russia is not the former USSR, right? It is not a threat to the rest of Europe to a large extent. And Moscow's efforts to have closer relations with Europe were dismissed by the West, however. Is the U.S. using Russia as an imaginary enemy, to some extent, to disrupt a potential European rapprochement?
Well, they have essentially recreated Russia as an enemy. And this dates back to long United States meddling in the domestic political affairs of the countries of the former Soviet Union. You can call this meddling. I mean, the United States seems to not like it, and even the suggestion that other countries would do it in its politics. But what the U.S. does is outright hybrid covert warfare, often referred to as color revolutions, where it spends billions of dollars to promote political forces, often radical political forces, to destabilize countries and elevate these positions that these politicians who will further U.S. foreign policy goals. And we saw that particularly, of course, in Ukraine in 2014 with the U.S.-backed Maidan Putsch. And Russia's response, not accepting that overthrow of the Ukrainian last legitimate democratically elected Ukrainian government in 2014, and its resulting military campaign, bloody military campaign for 8 years against its own people, resulting in 15,000 deaths, mostly in eastern Ukraine. The fact that Russia, simply objected to this and took actions to try to protect the people of East Ukraine from this led to outrage, because the West has basically considered that they have geopolitically flipped Ukraine, and it is now their territory.
The history, the issue goes way back. Mark, thanks very much. That's all the time we have. Sorry to interrupt you, but that's all the time we have. Thank you for watching, guys. Send us a comment on social media about how you feel about our program. Thanks for watching. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing.